All right, we are in week 3 of our sermon series entitled For Such a Time as This. We're doing this because we are making our way to our celebration weekend, which is coming up on October 17 and 18. That's our annual observance when we celebrate and lift up all that we do as a church together. That's why it's called Celebration Weekend. And at the same time, we then ask people, members, to make a commitment of their financial support for next year. So on October 18, you'll be asked to fill out a pledge card and to make an estimate of your giving for 2021. And so leading up to that, we've been talking for the last couple of weeks and today and next week about mission. What is that thing that the church does? What is it we are buying when we make our pledge? What is it that we are funding and that we are financing? Is it a campus and a building? Is it the light bill? Is it the heat bill? Is it to keep the thing going? And well, the answer is yes, that's true too. But the real mission of the church, and we learned that in the very first one, is to be engaged in God's mission. And God's mission is to the whole world. So mission is always outward oriented. The very word mission means to send, comes from the Latin. And so God sends us into the world just like Jesus sent the 12 disciples today in our gospel lesson to bring the good news to the villages. They all have, and that was the second point we've been making, a seat at the table. We are using the book, The Mission Table by Stephen Bowman, as kind of our guide. And this metaphor of a table where we all come together, where we get our identity, where we are loved, where we have a seat, where we are fed. This is a table where we are fed, just like the dining room table at home. We have a seat at that table, and that enables us to do that mission. The third point we've been making was last week, that the incarnation, when God becomes incarnate, becomes enfleshed in the baby of Bethlehem, that is probably the deepest and most intimate expression of this mission of God, the Missio Dei, which is to reconcile with all of creation and to reconnect. And then finally, last week, towards the end, we said, just like Tip O'Neill, the Speaker of the House many decades ago, used to say that all politics are local, I said all mission is local. It starts here and then goes out from here into the immediate neighborhood, across the street, and then into the larger neighborhood and into the town and the county and the world. But it's local. It begins here. And so today, that's where we want to pick up. We want to talk about mission of the local congregation, particularly about Christ the King and how we've been living out this mission that God has given us to do. And I want to start with a story, not about CTK, but about another congregation I used to work with. 25 years ago now, I was an assistant to the bishop in New Jersey, and I was the mission director on staff, and that meant that I was in charge of starting new congregation and of helping a struggling small congregation to kind of reorient themselves into mission and to begin to think about what God was calling them to do other than to decline and die off, right? And so I was working with this one congregation in Elizabeth, New Jersey, very urban kind of area right off the turnpike. I mean, if you always think of New Jersey as, the turnpike exit number 9, that's kind of what it looks like. And the congregation, I'm going to change the name of it. I'm going to call it St. Hedwig's by the gas station. Because that's what the neighborhood looked like, St. Hedwig's by the gas station. I'm doing this to protect the guilty, right? Well, this was a small church, 150 years old, right off the New Jersey Turnpike. They had been there for many years in this little neighborhood, a castle-like looking building, 25, 30 white people, 50 if everybody showed up, in the middle of a mostly Latino, poor inner city neighborhood. They had a very prominent location, but they also had a huge, gigantic fence around their property. 8 feet tall, I'm not kidding you. I'm not making this up. And the worst part about this fence was not only just it went all around the property, but it went right across the front entrance. You know, imagine there is these steps going up to the front doors, red like most churches, but then this 8-foot fence is right there where the stairs started, telling you that you weren't supposed to go in that way. They hadn't used that entrance in decades probably, and the people who lived in the suburbs knew to come and drive in the back, take the back gate, drive into the parking lot, and then use the back entrance to the church. Well, you didn't know that if you weren't part of that church, you just lived in the neighborhood. And so the first thing I said to that church was, I said, if you want to be in mission, if you want to serve your neighborhood, if you want to be connected, the first thing you have to do is take down that fence and open up that front door and invite the neighborhood in. That went over like a lead balloon, of course. And the immediate reaction was, we can't possibly do that. Do you have any idea how dangerous that neighborhood is? All these hoodlums are going to come in and they're going to rob us. That was kind of the attitude they had. And needless to say, the work I was trying to do with them never went anywhere. And after a few months, all that fizzled out and they just did what they always did and kept dying and declining. And not long after that, it was just a few months, they closed and the building got sold. And that next Sunday when I was driving by, guess what? The fence was down. The front doors were open, and a couple hundred people were streaming into the church. The Pentecostals had bought the building, and they now were doing the mission that God had called us to do and that we were just way too afraid of doing. I'm telling you this as kind of the opposite of what the mission of God is like, right? An example of how not to do it, because mission, a congregation in mission is always oriented outward, never on itself. It's always connected to the neighborhood, never ignores what goes on right around their campus or their building, and it's always inviting everyone to the table. Everyone is welcome, no exception. Stephen Bowman, in his book, The Mission Table, right, makes a good point. He identifies 10 characteristics, 10 things that missional congregations are about. And we won't have time to dig into all of them today. If you're interested in that, you can see them on the screen right there. On Wednesday evenings, we are actually having Stephen Bowman on a Zoom meeting with us. It's been wonderfully rich conversations. And this coming Wednesday, we're going to talk about these 10 things, and we'll be able to talk to Steve Bowman about that directly and kind of dig into that a little bit. But the one that's always most important to me is that a congregation in mission is always listening. It's always listening. And it's listening in a variety of ways. It's listening to God, number one. It's listening to the people in the church, and it's listening to the people outside of the church in the neighborhood. Steve Bowman, here's a quote from his book, says, "The most effective mission strategies I have encountered have not been the ones with all the demographic bells and whistles and the embodiment of the latest process and strategic theories." He says, "They have been about congregations really caring and creating space and hospitality for the stories of their members and neighbors to be told, as it was for Jesus. To be in mission is to listen." So the 3 great listenings that he describes in his book, number 1 is to listen to God first and foremost. Well, how do we do that? God is, we don't see God. We can't sit him down for a cup of coffee most of the time. Well, there's 3 ways we listen to God. We have Scripture, that's God's word, and certainly reading Scripture is listening to God. We can talk to God in prayer and then listen to see what comes back, and that could be a quiet feeling in the middle of our hearts. That could be a thought in the middle of a sleepless night. There could be a loud bang, something that happens in your life that makes it really clear what God is saying. You know what I'm talking about, right? So prayer is the second thing. And then the third thing is what Martin Luther used to call the mutual consolation and conversation of the saints, where as people of God, we talk to one another. And in that conversation, when it's deep and rich, we can listen to God. Secondly, and that leads to that second listening, is listening to the people in the church. You know, we can do one-on-ones, conversations, we can do surveys, we can do focus groups. I'll say a little bit about this in a minute. But listening to the church as people of God, to listen to one another. And then largely, and this is probably the most important one, and not all churches ever get there because they get so busy with the other two, that the most important one is listening to the community around us, right? Having a conversation with the gas station attendant across the street, reaching out to the principal of the high school and seeing how things are going over there. Having a one-on-one with, you know, the alderman or the town council member or whoever to talk about what's going on in this community, in this town, in this city, in this neighborhood. Listening to the community. Those are the three great listenings. And Bowman says, and here's another quote, the whole church participates in God's mission. We listen to the world around us. We are continually doing one-on-ones with our neighbors, listening to their hopes, aspirations, insights, and giftedness. End quote. Especially, it's essentially telling stories, right? And listening to other people's stories. And in that process, discerning how God is calling us into mission in this place and in the world. You may not realize this, but I know many of you were part of that. We used those three great listenings just a couple years ago when we developed our strategic plan. You've hopefully heard about the 5 strategic directions, right? Anybody know what they are? Those are supposed to be on your heart. That's our elevator speech. You're supposed to be able to rattle them off. 5 strategic directions. Engage youth and young adults. Develop disciples. Practice bold and deliberate inclusion. Build intentional hospitality. And advocate for peace and social justice. Those are the 5 things that we heard you all say and the community say when we went through that process a couple years ago. And ever since, our ministry boards and our committees and teams have been living into these 5 strategic directions. They're hanging in our atrium just as a reminder that this is what God's mission through Christ the King is all about. And of course, the point I want to make today is that as we develop that, we used the 3 great listenings. We had Bible studies. We had one-on-ones with members in the church. We had one-on-ones with members in the community. We did demographic studies to find out what's going on around us. We did a survey that included 700 people. I mean, hundreds of people literally were part of this listening campaign that we did that brought us those 5 strategic directions, just as an example. And I'm going to give you another example of how mission works at CTK. And this is an example that's kind of close to my heart, and it's an appropriate one for today when we recognize Possibility Sunday. I said that Possibility Sunday is a really important event that we have on the first Sunday in October because October is National Disabilities Awareness Month. And it's a chance to lift up the ministry with and among people with disabilities that we do here at CTK and beyond in the community. So we celebrate that, and the name Possibility is really important because we want to not focus on the disability of the person. That's not what defines them. They are not a disabled person, right? We want to focus on the possibilities that they have and the gifts that God has given us. They are a person with disabilities, but they are a person with many other things as well. That's why possibilities is such an important distinction that we make when we celebrate this day. We did that for the first time last year on the first Sunday in October. And since then, we've had a Sunday school class that the members of our disability ministry themselves led, 6 sessions on Jesus and disabilities. We had special worship services. 4 people with disabilities and their families and caregivers and supporters. We began to establish some relationships with other groups in the community who do disability ministry. For example, the North Carolina Lodge, which is a originally French organization, but they are all over the world now. And then probably one of the bigger things we've done more recently is we've begun to sponsor the Triangle Alliance Chorus. This is a choir of people with disabilities who's been together for many years, but they had lost their nonprofit sponsors and they needed someone, and so they are now a program or a project of Christ the King Lutheran Church, and we provide the administration and the fundraising and some of the more mundane things that these folks need so that they can do the beautiful music that they do. They are on a hiatus right now because of the coronavirus, but they will be starting up again as soon as that's possible and feasible. And in the meantime, we've been staying in touch through Zoom, like so many other things we do on Zoom today, right? So that's just another example of how we do this mission. And I want to give one more before I sit down and finish. And that is something that's coming up very soon. For the last 3.5 years, Christ the King has been at the forefront of a new organization that's forming in Wake County. It's called One Wake, and the one stands for Neighbors, Our Neighbors Empowering, Organized Neighbors for Empowerment. I'm going to get this right. Organizing Neighbors for Empowerment, One Wake, right? And it is, at this point, 42 Christian congregations, synagogues, and mosques that are working together. We're hoping for 50. We are very close to our goal. And if you think about that, 42 congregations of those three faiths, if you count together their memberships, you're talking some 50,000 people that are being represented here. And now you get a glimpse of what this is about. This is about combining our resources, combining whatever power we have as a single congregation to together make a difference. We've been working with the Industrial Areas Foundation to do community organizing and to learn the tools of that. One-on-ones, action meetings, and so on. There's a lot of training that goes on, because this is the best chance that I think we have to combine our strength with others to really make a difference. We went through a long listening campaign. There it is again. That's today's theme, right? Long listening campaign last fall. Some of you were part of that. We did 3,300 conversations, a couple hundred of those here at Christ the King, to find out what was on people's minds, what were the pressures in their lives, what were the problems that they encountered in their living in their neighborhoods. And out of that, right, then came our agenda: affordable housing, decent jobs, and public education. Those are the three things we want to work on. And together with this combined strength, we've developed proposals in each of these three areas that we are going to present to office holders, public officials, and also candidates for office. And that will happen very soon on Tuesday, October the 13th. Tuesday, October the 13th. We call that the Founding Assembly. And it really is the official meeting where we kind of publicly bring out this congregation and baptize it, if you want to. It's our first really big public event. We think we're going to have more than 2,000 people there. It's going to be on Zoom, of course, so it'll be fairly easy to attend. Our goal is 2,000. At last Friday, I checked for Christ the King. We had 47 signed up, and Christ the King is hoping for 250. So think about this as the commercial in the middle of the sermon, right? We really want you there. This is important. It's somewhat historic. It's not every day that you have a founding assembly of a big, very effective community organization that's going to make a big difference in the lives of everyone that lives in this county. So please put that on your calendar if you haven't already. Tuesday, October 13 at 7 p.m. on Zoom. And you can go to this link, ctkcarry.com/sign up, and there you will find a button right there at the very top to go sign up for that. We need 250 people there so we can show that Christ the King is really on board. As one of the first congregations that signed up for this, it's important that we are well represented. So you can see we still have, 203 to go or something? So please do that. I picked this photo because I thought you'd get a kick out of it. This was before the renovations began in our sanctuary, and it was one of the first public internal assemblies, they are called, that they had at that time. They were called the Wake County Sponsors then. This is before we even picked the name. This is an example, an action item that I have for you. I really want you to sign up, and that link is in the chat right now as well. So I leave you with this. Stephen Bowman says that it begins at the kitchen table, right? Where we are formed, where we are fed, where we begin life. But then it moves to the altar table, where all the kitchen tables of the congregation come together into one. But it doesn't stay here either from this table. It then goes out into the world. Bowman says it like this. We learn to love the most vulnerable at the kitchen table. We learn to have a heart for justice and equity for all people at the altar table. Mission today is building tables, expanding tables, inviting others to tables, allowing ourselves to be invited to the table of others. The voice calling out into the night is calling you. We have been baptized for this moment, says Bowman. My question for you this morning is this. If Bowman is right, and God is calling us into action for such a time as this, are we listening